Nobody wants to hear certain words. And especially a lawyer does not want to hear certain words, which I heard in the clerk of court's office right here in Concord a fairly short time ago. Looking across the desk, he had to say to me, "Mr. Medlin, this will fails. It cannot be probated." Alfred Borg, one of our neighbors, lived here in town for many, many years, has authorized me to tell you folks this story about what happened to him and with wills that he and his wife made when they were living in New Jersey many, many years ago. They moved here to Concord. Their wills had been drawn by an excellent attorney up in New Jersey. They thought those wills were going to be good right here in Concord in North Carolina, but they weren't. They weren't drawn according to North Carolina standards, and the will could not be probated. Now, had we not gotten that will probated, Mr. Borg was going to be in serious financial difficulty, because that estate of his was passed by the intestate succession law without a will. A huge portion of his assets he needed to live on were going to somebody else. Now, after about a year of detective work, endless phone calls to New Jersey, and some dumb luck, we finally found the witnesses that had signed that will decades before. We got them to witness, we got the will probated. Mr. Borg had the money that he needed to live on for the rest of his life. But we got lucky. And folks, I'm here to try to make sure that none of us has to hear those words any time in our future again, that some will has failed, or that some part of our plan didn't make it. It's a pleasure to be with you. I've enjoyed this group. I know several of you, and I've had dealings with a lot of folks here. But I used to start these talks like this by asking who in the group had a will. And about half the group typically would say they did, and I don't ask that question anymore, because I'm here to tell you that everybody here has a will, whether you've been to some lawyer's office to get it prepared or not. Because if you never went to a lawyer's office to make that will, the state of North Carolina has made a will for you, called the intestate succession law. And the only thing I will promise you about that law is it's not what you would have wanted. Guaranteed. It's only one of those guaranteed things in life. It's not what you would have wanted. And part of why I come talk to groups is to make sure that they know if they want their desires handled, you've got to make a will the right way. This is not an area of life where you want to be using the cookie cutter approach. It just doesn't work. This is not an area of life where you shortchange, because family fights can happen oh so easily when we are not clear about what we want done. And I see so many heads nodding around the room all of a sudden. Family fights can happen, folks. Had Mr. Borg not been able to get his will probated, we would have had a family fight, and we probably would have lost. That I do know. But what I do in my law office is try to make sure that we reach the unique result of each individual. Because every family is different, everybody's needs are different, there are different emotions, and there's just a different dynamic wherever I talk to people about their wills. For one thing, if there are children involved, it is important to be naming guardians for the children and alternate guardians for children. And if I give this talk to some group where I can see most likely no one has young children, I remind them you have grandchildren or nieces and nephews or any number of people that may not know who their guardians will be, or may not have had some guardians chosen for them. I think this is a responsibility of all of us to our whole family to tell them to make an estate plan, to talk to a qualified attorney about that estate plan. There are also some wonderful things we can do using trusts, using some other fine abilities that we have to protect children, to protect the elderly, to protect spouses that remain behind, and also to work very closely with some financial planners. And there are some very, very good ones right here in this church. We have some wonderful financial planning people, some experts right here in town. But it's a pleasure for me anytime I can get to work with a financial planner, because they've done about half the work for me before I get started. And the family is amenable to talking about the kind of planning you have to do to get your plan on paper so that it actually is put into place. One of those really important jobs is choosing an executor. Because I've seen so many times an executor chosen without much thought and the estate suffering thereafter. I like to be sure people appoint an executor with some business sense and somebody with the determination to stay with an estate and to make sure that it's settled correctly. But the main thing I'm trying to get folks to do is avoid the family fight. That's what I see happen way too often, is people being indefinite or not making a plan at all. The family fight erupts, and folks, it can still be going on decades later. We all know of some cases like that in the community. We all maybe have heard about those in other families or perhaps our own family. Those things should be avoided. We need to be avoiding the expensive courtroom and going to an attorney to make a will to satisfy your unique situation. I do see some real difficulties in our modern age of folks thinking that they can make a will off the internet, out of a form book, or handwrite a will. I have to confess with you, in a way I like internet wills. In a way I like handwritten wills. Because I make so much money with them. Because they're so bad. And the estates are in so much trouble when the people come to me with these strange documents that they create themselves or somebody else created or they got off the internet. And yet I'm not serving the public well to tell them anything except those very, very generalized, sometimes odd documents you can find on the internet or out of a form book are multi-state documents. They're not designed for North Carolina. They're not designed for your individual needs. They're dangerous. They're very, very dangerous. In fact, I do believe that there's nothing any more expensive in this life than cheap legal services. And I really mean that. Sometimes you can pay a little bit of money and get an awful lot of trouble later on because the cookie-cutter approach to estate planning just doesn't work. It's way too ham-fisted and imprecise. See, there are so many wonderful things we can do in an estate plan to protect those that remain behind. There are some things we have to sometimes talk about avoiding also. For an awful lot of people, they're being told that the remedy for all their problems is something like a revocable living trust. They're told about the estate of J. Paul Getty or others where a third or a half of the estate might have been devoured by lawsuits. And I have to look across the table and ask people, do you really have an estate quite as complicated as J. Paul Getty? You know, most of us have estates that are fairly simple. And unless an estate is truly unusual, something like the revocable living trust just isn't needed. I spoke at a local church a few weeks ago, a group of about 30 people. And in that group, 4 different families had worked with attorneys out of state or out of North Carolina or out of this town, and they all had these revocable living trusts, huge thick books, endless paper. They didn't accomplish a thing they needed. And it made me sad that they paid sometimes $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 for an estate plan that wasn't done correctly, didn't serve their needs. They could have gotten the same thing for hundreds of dollars. Much simpler, much more detailed and directed to what they really, really needed. Again, I am of the belief that the quickie, cheapy estate plan is sometimes the most expensive thing a family will ever purchase because it just keeps on costing money way, way out into the future. And I truly urge people not to let the internet or a form book or the quickie cheapy pound your square peg of an estate plan into the round hole of somebody's predetermined idea of what you need. Make sure you get your desires carried out. Again, there are large estates that need special attention. The financial planners do a wonderful job helping us prepare for that kind of work and knowing what the families need to take care of their future. You know, things such as charitable remainder trusts, life insurance trusts. They're just a plethora of opportunities if you get the right kind of advice and seek people that really know what they're talking about. In fact, if you just have a case where your papers are real old, or maybe they were acquired in some way that you're probably not talking about right now, come see me. Let me look at them. If they're right, I'll tell you. If they're not, we'll open a dialogue as to what to do to get that estate plan the way it ought to be. Because I really do believe it is important that you be in charge of your estate and what happens out in the future, not the government deciding for you. Folks, just reasonable effort on our parts working together can make a good estate plan. The government telling you what your estate plan ought to be is never going to be right. Just don't let that happen to you. And be looking around in your own family, extended family, and listening. Who else needs the services of a professional or a team of professionals to get their estate set up correctly? Now, in just a few minutes, we're going to have some question and answer time. That's where I find out what's really on your minds. But I do want to talk with you about a couple of things before we do so. One is I certainly hope nobody here is going to be dying anytime soon. You folks certainly are well fed this morning, as I am too. Excellent breakfast. But also, we know that most likely we have an opportunity for the bad car crash, the serious illness. Any number of things can make us so we can't handle our own business affairs for a time. We don't need a will yet. We're not going to die, but we're out of commission. A business or a financial power of attorney can make sure that somebody, a spouse, a trusted business acquaintance, a child of suitable age, can handle your business going forward. And again, I set up those powers of attorney to handle many, many things that are beyond the scope of what we talk about this morning. It is important who you choose, and we ask the questions. When I talk to folks in my office, I ask a lot of questions to get to who is the right kind of person to handle your financial dealings in the future, as long as you all have some alternates as well. We can take care of that. We found out back after Hurricane Hugo how few people had those powers of attorney. Some of them had trees through their roofs and all kinds of other problems, and the person owning the home was injured in the hospital, couldn't make a decision, but nobody else could either. They didn't have that power of attorney and needed it, very much needed it. Also, a healthcare power of attorney, wholly separate document from the business power of attorney, sets up your future so that somebody you know and trust, the right kind of discretion, handles your medical decisions in the event you cannot do so yourself. Everybody here will remember that case of Terry Schiavo some several years ago down in Florida. The young lady was very young, about 30 years of age. Had no reason to think she was ever going to wind up in the situation she did. But there went the darndest family fight you've ever seen, with the parents against the husband, on and on and on over so much time and so much money and so much heartache. All of that could have been prevented with just a few $100s of planning in an attorney's office. And that's what I tell people. Look for those folks who need this kind of planning. Assist them also to getting this kind of planning in your own family, in your own community. A living will also can be very, very important. The living will most of us have heard about. It's technically a declaration of a desire for a natural death. It says that in the event you are terminally ill, that is, you're going to die from whatever disease you have, you can no longer communicate. You can't tell what to do about your medical treatment. You can't tell anything. Only in that circumstance Do you communicate to the medical community through this living will, no more treatment? I'm never going to know where I am again. My family will never talk to me. I will die. I am terminally ill. No more heroic means to keep me alive. Let me die. Pain medication only, comfort medication, that's all. Well, folks, when my old father died several years ago, he was getting dressed to come to work. I worked with him for 25 years in my law office. But he fell over with a major stroke. By the time we all got to the hospital, there were no brain waves anymore. We were never going to talk to him again. But he was crystal clear about his plans and about his living will. It wasn't easy, but we said no treatment. That's what Dad wanted, no treatment. He had set things up and told us what he wanted. It made it a whole lot easier to make that kind of decision. What we've talked about this morning is really responsibility. Responsibility in your own family, responsibility in extended family and your community as well. Because what we're all doing is creating our own legacy. We're looking down the road and asking, what are people going to say about you at your own funeral? And it's a good question to ask. What glowing, wonderful things do you want said at that moment? And then you reverse engineer your life to say, now what do I need to be doing all these years to set things up so that people can say those wonderful things about me when I'm no longer here? Well, none of us really cares if folks talk about how big our house was, or how many vacations we took, or how, darn, that guy had the fastest sports car. It would go from 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. You don't really care about that. Nobody really wants to hear at their funeral, he had the biggest. You fill in the blank. That's not what people care about. What they really care about is, did you take care of business? Did you take care of your family? Did you make things easy for those who stayed behind to settle your business or those that depend on you? That's the real question that folks ask. And I urge you to be careful to make sure it is your plan that is put in place, not some plan dictated by the government. Let it be your plan throughout your family. If someone has an existing plan, get it looked at. Just get it reviewed every now and then. I'm happy to review people's plans, and sometimes I read and say, nice job. You ought to be happy. And sometimes I read a plan and say, we need to talk. This doesn't do the job you want done, or circumstances have changed over the years. We need to talk more. But either way, we have to be careful to be sure the plan is going to work, that it's the right kind of plan, and takes care of those that remain behind. Well, once again, I will mention it is always a pleasure to be with the men's group. You know, the nature of you fellows and the fact that you're here at this hour on a Sunday morning tells me an awful lot about you. You are the sort of people that are concerned about your church, about your own spiritual life, about your family, and about each other. And I can tell that here, that you are concerned about each other. It's fun for me to get with a group like this. I appreciate the opportunity. And I also like to hear what's on your mind, because that's where I find out what I really should have told you all the time. But again, what a pleasure to meet with you this morning. What questions do you have?
Let me just add to what you're saying.